my friend. Have you ever been in the middle of an English conversation and suddenly stopped because you didn't know whether to say bye or for or off? Maybe you understand the sentence, but when it's your turn to speak, the right word disappears from your mind. If that sounds familiar, I want you to know something: you are not bad at English. You are learning. Let's begin with one of the smallest words in English, but also one of the most useful: bye. You may see this word everywhere. You hear native speakers use it in conversations, movies, podcasts, songs, and everyday situations. But sometimes, even when you understand the meaning of a sentence, using by yourself can feel confusing. The good news is that you do not need to memorize hundreds of complicated grammar rules. You simply need to understand the most common ways people use bye in real English conversations. One of the most common uses of be is to talk about the method or way something happens. For example, you can say, I usually go to work by bus. Here, be tells us the method of transportation. You can say, she traveled by train. We went there by car. Or, he came by taxi. When you want to explain how you travel, be is often the natural choice. You can also use it with communication methods. For example, I contacted him by email. She sent the information by text, or we talked by phone. In these sentences, be helps explain the way the action happened. Another important use of be is when you talk about who created or performed something. For example, this book was written by George Orwell. The word be tells us who performed the action of writing. You can say, the song was written by a famous musician. The picture was painted by my friend. Or, the movie was directed by a talented filmmaker. This is especially common in passive sentences, and you will hear it frequently in everyday English. Now let's talk about time. Be is very important when you want to say that something will happen no later than a specific time. For example, please finish this work by Friday. This means Friday is the latest time you should finish it. You can finish earlier, but you should not go beyond Friday. You can say, I'll call you by tonight. Please send me the document by tomorrow, or I need to be home by 6. This is different from simply saying 6. When you say 6, you are talking about a specific time. When you say by 6, you mean any time before 6 or no later than 6. Be can also describe the way you do something personally. For example, I learned English by watching movies. Here, by watching movies explains the method you use to learn. You could say, she improved her pronunciation by practicing every day. She became more confident by speaking with native speakers. Or, I remember new words by writing them down. This is one of the most useful patterns for English learners because you can use by to explain how you achieve something. Think about your own English learning journey. You might say, I improved my English by listening to podcasts. You might say, I learned new expressions by watching English videos. You could also say, I practice speaking by talking to myself. These are simple sentences, but they sound natural because clearly explains the method. There is another common use of by when talking about being close to something or someone. For example, she is sitting by the window. This means she is sitting near the window. You can say, there is a small cafe by the river. He stood by the door, or I live by the beach. In these examples, be means near or beside. You may also hear by yourself, which means alone or without help. For example, did you do this by yourself? Someone might ask this when they are impressed that you completed something without assistance. You can say, yes, I did it by myself. Another example is, she learned English by herself. This means she learned without a teacher or formal assistance. Be also appears in many everyday expressions. You may hear someone say, by the way. This expression is extremely common in conversations. It is used when you want to add another piece of information that is connected to the conversation, but not directly part of the main topic. For example, by the way, did you call your brother? Or, by the way, I saw your friend yesterday. Once you start listening for this expression, you will notice how often native speakers use it. You can also use by when talking about amounts or differences. For example, the price increased by $10. This means the price became $10 higher. You can say, the temperature dropped by 5 degrees, or our team won by 2 points. In these sentences, by tells us the amount of change or difference. The most important thing is not to become afraid of this tiny word. You do not need to think about every grammar rule while speaking. Instead, listen to how be is used in real conversations and practice simple patterns. Say sentences like, I go by bus. I'll finish it by tomorrow. I learned it by practicing. She lies by the river, and I did it by myself. Repeat them until they begin to feel natural. When you understand these patterns, B stops being a confusing grammar word and becomes a practical tool you can use naturally. You begin to recognize that one small word can help you talk about methods, transportation, deadlines, people, locations, changes, and independence, giving you more confidence every time you open your mouth to speak English, because the goal is not to speak perfectly from the beginning, but to keep practicing until the words that once felt difficult begin to come naturally in your conversations. When you start learning English, one of the smallest words you will hear again and again is for. It looks simple, but it can be confusing because English speakers use for in many different situations. The good news is that you do not need to memorize hundreds of complicated grammar rules to understand it. You simply need to notice the patterns and practice using them in real conversations. The word for often helps us explain purpose, duration, benefit, reason, or the person something is intended for. Let's begin with one of the most common uses talking about purpose. When you want to explain why something is used or what something is intended to do, for is very useful. For example, you can say, this bag is for carrying books. You can say, this room is for meetings. You can say, this app is for learning English. In these sentences, for connects the thing with its purpose. If someone asks, what is this button for? You can answer, it's for turning on the light. This kind of sentence is extremely common in everyday conversations. For is also commonly used when talking about a period of time. If an action continues for a certain amount of time, we use for before the length of that time. You might say, I studied English for 2 hours. You could say, she lived there for 5 years. You can also say, we waited for 30 minutes. Notice that for tells us how long something happened. This is different from saying when something started. If you say, I have been learning English for 3 months, you are explaining the duration of your learning. This is a very useful structure because conversations often include questions like, how long have you been here? Or how long have you been studying English? Another important use of for is when something is intended for a person. If you buy something for someone, for shows who will receive or benefit from it. You can say, I bought this gift for my mother. You can say, this message is for you. You can say, I made some coffee for my friend. These sentences are simple, but they appear constantly in real English conversations. Imagine someone comes to your office and asks, is this package for me? You can answer, yes, it's for you. That is natural English. Of or can also express benefit. When something is good, useful, helpful, or harmful to someone or something, we often use for. For example, exercise is good for your health. Walking is good for your body. This book is useful for beginners. Too much stress is bad for you. Here, for connects an action or thing with the person or area affected by it. This is especially important because English learners often try to translate directly from their first language and may choose the wrong preposition. Instead of translating every sentence word by word, learn common combinations such as good for, bad for, useful for, important for, and helpful for. Another everyday use is explaining a reason or purpose behind an action. You might say, thank you for helping me. You could say, sorry for being late. You can say, thanks for coming. In these examples, for is followed by a noun or an ing form. This pattern is very common. If someone helps you, you might naturally say, thank you for helping me. If you apologize, you might say, sorry for making you wait. If someone gives you something, you might say, thanks for the gift. Learning these expressions can make your English sound much more natural because native speakers use them automatically. For is also important when talking about a purpose connected with an activity. For example, I went to the store for some milk. You might say, she went outside for a walk. You can say, we stopped for lunch. In these examples, for helps explain the reason for going somewhere or stopping somewhere. You do not always need a long sentence to communicate clearly. A simple expression like, I'm going out for coffee, can sound completely natural in conversation. You will also hear for when talking about opinions or reactions. Someone might say, for me, English pronunciation is difficult. Another person might say, for me, this method works better. Here, for me means from my point of view or in my experience. This expression is useful when you want to share your personal opinion without saying that everyone must agree with you. One of the best ways to master for is to stop thinking of it as one word with one meaning. Instead, think of it as a useful tool that changes meaning depending on the situation. When you hear for, ask yourself, is it showing purpose? Is it showing duration? Is it showing who benefits? Is it explaining a reason? Is it describing something that is good or useful for someone? Now imagine using these patterns in your daily life. You wake up and say, I have been studying English for 6 months. You prepare breakfast for your family. You use your phone for learning new vocabulary. You thank your friend for helping you. You go outside for a walk. You realize that English is no longer just a school subject. It is becoming part of your everyday life. And remember, you do not need perfect English before you start speaking. You learn by speaking, listening, making mistakes, correcting yourself, and trying again. Every small sentence gives your brain another opportunity to recognize the pattern. The more you practice phrases like, for you, for me, for 2 hours, for learning, good for, and thank you for, the more naturally they will come to you in real conversations. Now let's talk about one of the smallest words in English, but one of the most important is the of. You hear it everywhere. Native speakers use it constantly, often thou, without even thinking about it. And because hof appears in so many different expressions, it can sometimes feel confusing. But once you understand the basic idea behind it, you will start recognizing it everywhere. And more importantly, you will start using it naturally in your own conversations. One common use of of is to show a relationship or connection between two things. For example, we say the name of the city, the door of the house, or the color of the car. In these sentences, of connects one thing to another. The name belongs to the city, the door is connected to the house, and the color describes the car. You can think of as a bridge connecting ideas. For example, imagine someone asks, what's the name of your school? You might answer, the name of my school is City High School. Here, of connects name with school. Another person might say, what's the capital of Pakistan? Again, of connects the capital with the country. These simple structures are extremely common in everyday English. We also use of when talking about belonging or possession. For example, this is a friend of my brother. The phrase tells us about the relationship between the friend and the brother. You could also say, she is a colleague of my father, or he is a neighbor of mine. These expressions help you explain relationships naturally without making your sentences complicated. Another very important use of is when we describe something or someone. For example, he is a man of courage. She is a woman of great talent. It was a moment of happiness. In these examples, of helps describe the quality or characteristic connected to a person, thing, or situation. You will also hear of when talking about quantities. This is one of the most useful patterns in daily conversations. We say, a cup of tea, a glass of water, a bottle of milk, a piece of cake, a group of people. And a lot of time, notice how naturally of connects the quantity or container with the thing inside it or being measured. Imagine you are sitting with a friend and your friend asks, would you like some tea? You can say, yes, I'd love a cup of tea. If you are at a restaurant, you might say, can I have a glass of water? If you are talking about work, you might say, I have a lot of work today. These are simple sentences, but they are exactly the kinds of expressions you need in real English conversations. Of is also very common when talking about parts of something. We say, the top of the mountain, the middle of the road, the end of the movie, the beginning of the story, and the front of the building. These expressions help us identify a specific part or position. For example, if someone asks, where are you? You might say, I'm at the front of the building. If you are explaining something that happened during a movie, you could say, I like the end of the movie. If you are describing a journey, you might say, we stopped at the top of the mountain. The word hof makes the relationship between the part and the whole clear. Another important area is common expressions. English learners often struggle because they try to translate every sentence directly from their first language. But many English expressions with of should simply be learned as natural phrases. For example, of course, or kind of, sort of, because of, hold of, instead of, and in front of. These expressions appear constantly in conversations. For example, of course, I can help you. It's kind of difficult. We stayed home because of the rain. Please stand in front of the door. These expressions may look small, but learning them can make your English sound much more natural. You can also use of when talking about choices or groups. For example, which of these do you like? One of my friends lives in London. Some of the students are absent today. Most of the people agreed with me. These structures are incredibly common in spoken English. Think about the sentence, one of my friends called me yesterday. You are not saying all your friends called you. You are choosing one person from a group. That is why off is used. Similarly, some of the students are ready means you are talking about a portion of the students. The most important thing is not to memorize hundreds of complicated rules. Instead, pay attention to the patterns. When you hear native speakers saying, a cup of coffee, one of my friends, the end of the day, or because of the weather, notice how naturally off fits into the sentence. And now, when you hear off in a movie, podcast, conversation, or English lesson, don't ignore it. Stop for a moment and ask yourself what relationship it is showing. Is it showing belonging, a part of something, a quantity, a description, a connection? The more you notice these patterns, the easier they become. Soon, instead of thinking, which grammar rule should I use? You will simply feel the sentence. You will begin saying phrases like, a lot of people, one of my friends, the name of the place, and because of the problem. Naturally, without stopping to translate every word. And that is when English begins to feel less like a subject you are studying and more like a language you are actually living through every conversation. Every mistake, every attempt, and every new sentence you speak with confidence today, we are going to make these three small words, BYFOR and OF, simple, natural, and useful in real English conversations. Because English is not about memorizing thousands of rules. It is about understanding how words live together, how native speakers use them, and how you can confidently use them in your everyday life. So don't worry if you have made mistakes before. Mistakes are not proof that you cannot speak English. They are proof that you are trying. And every time you try, you are one step closer to becoming the person who speaks English without fear. Stay with me, listen carefully, and practice with me. Because today, we are not just learning grammar. We are building confidence, one sentence at a time.